Hello, I'm Alexandra and I will present you a theoretical investigation carried out together with my colleague Sandra Miranda about activism in the age of mediated communication and the impact of new media on the development of these activist movements.
Our main purpose with this study was to investigate the role that new media has in the dissemination and development of activist movements and new notions of citizenship, as well as in the renewal of activist practices over time, also discussing the advantages and challenges that new media brought to these movements. A social movement, such as activism, is a social process through which collective actors articulate common interests, express certain criticisms, and propose solutions to identified problems through a variety of collective actions. These movements have three main characteristics. They are conflictual and have clearly defined ideological opponents. They are structured through dense informal networks. And finally, they are directed towards the development, support, and sharing of collective identities. The term activism, conceived at the level of social change and social movement theories, then refers to the practice and intentional development of actions with the aim of provoking or preventing socio-political changes. These movements can address the most varied issues, including political, social, environmental, cultural, economic, or even media subjects. However, if initially these social movements took place only through direct actions, such as protests, demonstrations, or boycotts, the emergence of new media has transformed the methods by which these movements are prepared and implemented. In fact, when the new media emerged in the 90s and started to be used by ordinary citizens, it led to profound economic, cultural, political, and social changes that favored the expansion of activism and altered the activist practices carried out at the time. First, the new media marked the transition from an industrial society to the so-called network or information society. This notion arises from the common belief that information has become one of the most important assets of contemporary life, including in economic terms. New media allow the development of this new society, considered as permanently connected and active and characterized by co-production and feedback relationships, in which citizens use technological means to organize themselves according with their values, affinities, and interests. In addition, the emergence of Web 2.0 popularized digital platforms such as blogs or social networks that allowed web users to communicate on a large scale, favored peer-to-peer and non-hierarchical communications, and brought notions such as immediacy, the reduction of barriers between private and public issues, and greater opportunities for civic expression. These features of Web 2.0 have thus led to the creation of multiple virtual communities with common interests and goals, giving them a greater ability to initiate or strengthen social movements worldwide, as they can communicate and share their ideals on a global scale and more easily place such issues on the public agenda. Finally, the participatory and collaborative environments of Web 2.0 also led to changes in the public's behavior, which became not only a receiver but also a producer and user of online content. The new media thus constituted a new stage of communication in which citizens assume the role of producers. There is active audience regarding media content, creating content capable of influencing the attitudes of other web users in relation to the most diverse subjects, which means that the public is also able to shape and influence opinions and co-create value. In this sense, cyberactivism arises from the inclusion of digital media in activist movements, encompassing online practices that involve social-political actions oriented toward social change. Such practices can range from the symbolic signaling of a position on a politicized issue to a more complex involvement, such as the creation of content related to social issues or the planning and coordination of activist movements. Likewise, the potential of new media to generate flows of information, opinion, and feedback, and the new forms of social connection enhanced by new technologies also enabled a broader and more inclusive notion of citizenship, in which citizens manage to create new contexts of public communication and civic participation. So, digital technologies provide new and important citizenship practices with greater ability to interfere in public opinion, inciting diverse political, social, and cultural actions and debates. This greater opportunity to create meanings in a shared way and to communicate a stance has led to the emergence of several activist movements, many of them initiated entirely on the web. One of the most mediatic movements was the so-called Arab Spring, a series of protests that began in 2010 and overthrew dictatorships in the Middle East and North Africa. Such protests were mainly organized through blogs and social networks such as Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. Furthermore, the triggering event of the Arab Spring was also disseminated through the internet, with the diffusion of the news that a young street retailer had set himself on fire in Tunisia in the face of the misery in which he lived. The sharing of this tragedy in the new media quickly turned into protests against unemployment, corruption, and repression in Tunisia, protests that expanded to the neighboring regions. Another movement, driven by a sequence of mobilizations on digital social networks, was the Spanish 15M movement. Contemporary with the Arab Spring, the 15M movement challenged the austerity policies implemented at the time, having as a high point the demonstrations of May 15 in 2011, which involved hundreds of protesters in several Spanish cities. These demonstrations were planned through online platforms such as social networks and websites and generated campings in several Spanish cities, which were publicized through messages on Twitter, bringing together thousands of people to debate proposals and the next steps of the movement. As we can see, the new media can fulfill a wide range of material and symbolic activist goals, bringing several advantages to the development and management of these movements. On the one hand, new media give activist movements the opportunity to communicate their views and actions in a faster and more interactive way, in addition to enabling low-cost and large-scale communication. This also provides a greater opportunity to spread the collective's ideological image of the movement and its agenda, as well as alternative news projects or media channels. New media also facilitate the internal management of activist movements, giving them greater power for coordination, fundraising, and mobilization of new supporters, as well as to organize online and offline protests, boycotts, and demonstrations, monitor or attack ideological enemies, and establish national and international social networks around the cause. Likewise, in the new media, activist movements are better able to influence and change norms, connotations, beliefs, and civic representations by disseminating alternative content and enabling the creation of new forms of identification and interconnection. This happens, in many cases, far from the state's control by hampering its ability to regulate the flow of information. Thus, new media allow the creation of parallel circuits of information and empowerment, which question hegemonic thinking and contribute to the collective negotiation of new shared realities. The ability to organize and communicate social movements across borders has been facilitating the comparison of individual experiences and social norms, leading to an increase in the relevance of certain socio-political problems worldwide and to faster mobilization and response cycles. However, establishing activist practices in the new media also brings some challenges. One of the main challenges of cyber activism is the so-called digital divide. There is extreme inequalities of access and use of the internet by citizens. In fact, although the internet offers a space for citizens to come together around causes, if the social impact of these movements is dependent on digital networks, the possibility of accessing them becomes a precondition for mobilization and participation in these movements. In addition, although some features of the internet make content regulation more difficult, this space also offers new forms for surveillance and control, namely by the state and large corporations, many of which control the information that is presented on digital platforms and can repress the goals and tactics of activist groups, especially in repressive regimes. Likewise, The nature of transience and constant renewal of information of most online platforms, such as social networks, often leads to information overload and excessive fragmentation, promoting a paradigm of viral episodes and simple and fast communications, which can enhance the ephemerality of these movements. These platforms also favor the emergence of discursive cocoons or echo chambers, where people are less likely to be confronted with different views, which can prevent a sustained and diversified debate on the cause. The lower costs of online participation also favor the so-called selectivism, which represents effortless online activist practices that have no real sociopolitical effects but only increase the personal satisfaction of those involved, often leading to a lack of coherence between online and offline practices. Finally, since any citizen can generate informative content online, often based on unofficial sources and possibly dependent on hidden funds, it can lead to trust issues, making it more difficult to distinguish accurate from fabricated information, such as conspiracy theories. In this way, it is increasingly important to establish a balance between traditional and digital forms of activism. It is crucial to overcome the online-offline alternative media, mainstream media, and new media traditional media dichotomy as a way of diversifying strategies of mobilization and debate, because social change only occurs with the support of civil society and coordination with state institutions. So, a holistic approach which combines traditional and digital forms of activism allows for a promotion of broader agendas and interests, also enabling greater influence of online events on offline actions and of offline activities on online debate. However, this doesn't diminish the importance of the emancipatory power that the new media came to provide to activist movements, being an emerging space for new voices, new social relationships, and alternative practices at the cultural and socio-political level.
Thank you for watching. We hope to have clarified some key points regarding this topic, and if you have any questions or comments, just contact us.